Assalamu alaikum. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Dear students, today we will start with lecture 25, which is origin of nomenclature. Lecture outlines. We will discuss origin of nomenclature, basic principles of binomial nomenclature, and zoological and botanical nomenclature. Lecture outcomes. So after watching and listening to this lecture, student will know about origin of nomenclature, basic principles of binomial nomenclature, and they will also become aware of the zoological and botanical nomenclature. So origin of nomenclature. In English, vernacular names or local names used are usually short and frequently monosyllabic. For example, bear, finch, frog, etc. So common name for species are often formed by modifying these names with descriptive noun or adjectives. Like for example, a polar bear. So bear will become a polar bear. Like a brown bear, a black bear, etc. So these double names are binomial, but these are vernacular or common names. So such vernacular or common names are not authentic. So this is binomial. Like a polar bear or brown bear is a binomial name, but it is not scientific. It is vernacular or common name, which is not authentic for scientific use, because these names, these changes from language to language. Like for bear, in Pashto, we say Melu, or we use in Urdu Balu. So the names now in different languages, this bear has different name. So that's why, because of the presence of thousands of languages, the name changed from language to language. So the pre-Linnaean taxonomists, they also tried to award names to taxa. They tried to name different taxa, but these names were not authentic. Some of them were uninomial, and some were binomial, and some were polynomial. Even there were polynomial names. But the reason for this conclusion was they tried to use naming and describing function in their names. I mean, these scientists tried to name an animal that such as that name will show the function, or they try to describe that animal and the name. Mean the name will show the function of the organism or some describing features. So they tried to name organisms by such names that those names will describe them or shows their function. But these were not like authentic. There were problems. Like for example, a species with relatives might be referred with qualifying adjectives. Like for example, there is Musca carnivora. Relative mean if you discover a new species. Like for example, Musca carnivora, and there is Musca canum. Now, for example, if a scientist, if he finds that there is another species of Musca carnivora, so what will happen to that Musca carnivora? I mean, how we will name them? So then they tried to name. They would refer them as Musca carnivora major. So the first one, the one which was discovered earlier, was then named Musca carnivora major, and the later one was named Musca carnivora minor. So in this way, like the names were not authentic. The names were like evolved into specific phrases, not to specific names. So a specific name must be very short. But now Musca carnivora major and Musca carnivora minor, So it become like a specific phrase, not a specific name. So that's why this system was like discarded and such names were not accepted. So what happens that it was Linnaeus who proposed a binomial system of nomenclature in 1758 when he published his 10th book named Systema Naturae. So in Systema Naturae, which was his book, for the first time he like proposed a binomial system of nomenclature. In binomial nomenclature, each organism is given two name, but the name must be Latinized later. It doesn't matter to which language it belongs, but it must be Latinized. So a generic name beginning with capital letter. So always the generic name, the first name is generic name. It always starts with capital letter, and then a specific name which begins with a small letter. Like for example, Musca. So this is the genus uh, Musca domestica. So like a housefly, binomial name or scientific name is Musca domestica. So Musca, M is capital in Musca, and then domestica. So it start with the small d. So the specific name should start with small letter. Okay, the second lecture, which is connected to the previous lecture, is lecture 26, in which we discuss the basic principles of binomial nomenclature. So we discussed binomial nomenclature, what is binomial nomenclature, but now the principles for like the basic rules for this binomial nomenclature. So the basic principles are, there are three types of nomenclature, which are like the zoological nomenclature, the botanical nomenclature, and the bacteriological nomenclature. So zoological and botanical nomenclature, we will talk about this one. So zoological and botanical nomenclatures are independent of each other. Mean that these two nomenclatures are not dependent on each other. They do not depend on each other, uh, due to which it is permissible. Like for example, it is permissible, but it is not desirable for a taxa, especially genus, to have the same name in zoology and botany. Mean it is permissible, it is allowed, but it should not be desirable that two taxa should have the same name, like the same name must for like taxa in zoology and a taxa in the botany. Like for example, we have a very good example over here. Like in zoology, Lemnia is a genus of snails, and this genus Lemnia is also present in botany. But in botany, it doesn't mean it's a genus of snails. Actually, Lemnia in botany is a genus of floating angiosperms. So now it's permissible, but it is not desirable because it will cause confusions. But anyhow, it is permissible but not desirable. Keep this thing in mind that it is not desirable. You cannot deliberately name the similar names for a taxa in botany and a taxa in zoology. So this it creates a confusion. But as we talked, that botanical and zoological nomenclatures are independent of each other. So in zoology, Lemnia genus is snail, but in botany, Lemnia is a small group of or genus of floating angiosperms. So this is Lemnia actually, the snail. Now, within the nomenclature, it doesn't matter if it is zoology or botany, two taxa cannot be the same, cannot be of the same name, but each taxa must have a single and correct name. So these are now the basic rules. Like in not only in zoology but also in botany, in nomenclature, two taxa cannot have the same name. Like the name must be single, unique, and different from every taxa. So every taxa should have a single, correct, and unique name. Second one, scientific names of taxa are treated as Latin regardless of derivation. So it doesn't matter from which language the name is derived, it must be Latinized. You have to Latinize it. For example, if you have a name Musk, so it should be you have to Latinize it like Muska. So every word should be Latinized. Like for example, Linnaeus even Latinized his own name, Carl Linnaeus. So he made it like a binomial name, like Carl Linnaeus. So correct name of a taxon is based on priority of publication. So we will in later in the coming lectures we will talk about the law of priority. So priority of publication means that correct name of a taxon is based on priority. For example, um, if there is an organism X and this organism X is named by Linnaeus in 1770 is for example A, and the same species X is named by another scientist, like for example Gilbert in 1880 is B, and another scientist in 1910 named it this X species as C. So now there are three names for this X species. One scientist named this X species as A, another named it as B, another named it as C. So what we will do now that this taxon X has three names which are named by different scientists like Linnaeus, Gilbert and one other scientist, they named it differently. So what we will do? So we will look at to the law of priority, and law of priority says that the correct name will be the one which is published earlier. For example, Linnaeus published it in 1770, the other one in 1880 and the other one in 1910. So the later two will be discarded and the one which is earlier published will be the correct name. So the correct name of the taxon will be based on priority of publication. So the name which is published earlier and prior to the list to the rest of the names will be the correct name of the taxon. So for the categories of order in plants, superfamily and animals and lower categories in both application of name is based on type specimen and type species, type genus. So mean for the categories of order, like in plants, the categories like order and superfamily like in animals, and lower categories for example both in plants and animals, application of the name is based on type specimen. Mean when you going to name them, these categories, order in superfamily and also the lower categories, and if you want to name them, so that naming should be based on the type specimen. Mean what is type specimen or type species or type genus? So every a group of specimens which makes a species is actually based on a type species. For example, there is an organism X and the name of this species is also X, and this X was first of all described from Australia, and that specimen was taken then to, for example, a very the international museum, like even at maybe like for example the museum is Australia, and it was named properly and it was stored there as type specimen. Now on the base of that type specimen, scientists from the whole world will recognize and they will collect a different specimen, and they will match the characteristics with that type specimen. They will characterize these new collected specimen on based on the characteristics of that type specimen. If the characteristics are matching, it means it is that same species. So a type specimen is, for example, it is like an example for the rest of the animals to be discovered. So when we like going to type a specimen, we type it on a type species, and then there is a type genus. For example, in a genus there is a type genus. When you are going to characterize or construct a new genus, you will construct that new genus based on that type genus. So type genus is just like it's an example, and then type superfamily, type family, type order, and so on and so on. Now, generic name, noun and specific name is adjective. Like generic name is noun and specific name is adjective or genitive, indicating position or close association. First letter of the generic name is capital and all other letters in scientific name are small. So keep this in mind, this is very important. Both generic and species names are written in italic when printed. So when you are going to write it with the help of a computer, or when you're going to type it, so you have to make it italic. So both the generic and the specific, both names should be like italic, in italics. And when you are going to write it by hand, so you have to underline it. So this is very important. If your scientific name is not italic, or it is not like handwritten and it's not underlined, so this is not correct, this is wrong. And this is also very important, so keep this number 6 also in mind. Number 8, the gender of species must be in agreement with gender of genus. Mean the gender should also be in like agreement with each other. So the generic name and the specific name, their gender should be in agreement. If the species name is adjective, so its gender must also be in agreement with the genus. So like there should be understanding between the two names, both like in the generic and in the specific name. For example, SS. SS mean, for example, albas and ba, alba. So it these names should be like in agreement with each other. While genitive or neuter names, so the neuter name means neutral names are not changed. Like for example, Smithy. So you will not change the name like Smithy. Now these are important. Masculine ends on us, us. So the name end with us like this one is masculine. The name which ends with a is feminine. So now albas, this name is masculine, and ba, alba, this name is now feminine. And neuter names normally end with um. So these are like the basic rules of the zoological nomenclature, and this is the references. Now if you want to study this in detail, you can like download the zoological code, that book we talked about in the previous lecture, from online, or you can also download it from my website. Just log into your account on my website, go to the systematic zoology section, and then you can download it from there. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any question, please ask.